there was a huge weekend of horse racing, which will have a big impact on the 2018 Kentucky Derby. And I wanted to get right into it. There were two races that had points on the line in terms of qualifying for the Kentucky Derby. The Rebel Stakes, which was probably the bigger of the two and had more points on the line. The winner got 50. And also there was the Jeff Ruby Stakes, where the winner got 20. So I'll start off with discussing the Rebel, and then I'll discuss the Jeff Ruby. So some background with the Rebel. There was definitely a great field going in. It was a great race. It lived up to it. There's been a couple in the past couple of weeks that have really, there was a nice field going into it, and it was a really nice and competitive, fun race to watch. A quick thing, I was looking back at the history of the Rebel. There's been a lot of years where there's been well-known horses and horses that have gone on either perform well in the Kentucky Derby or in their careers subsequent that, either in the following two Triple Crown races or in the rest of their 3-year-old career and onward from that. Two in particular that I wanted to talk about. One was American Pharoah, who of course won the Triple Crown in 2015. He raced and won in the Rebel. And then also going back a little bit was Smarty Jones, who won the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness and was a really outstanding horse. So that, of course, each year is different in terms of you can't say just because there was a strong field one year that a couple of years later that whoever wins is equal to that. But it's just interesting to discuss the past significance of this race. So the winner was Magnum Moon, who is trained by Todd Pletcher and was relatively inexperienced coming into this race. He had not run in first of all, he's undefeated, but those two wins were, they were not in stakes races. And maybe more relevant to this discussion, they weren't in races where points were on the line for the Derby, but he did win both of those races. But I'll get to more in Magnum Moon in a second. There was also Salamini, trained by Bob Baffert in this race, and then there was I thought the rest of the field was really good as well, and maybe there's still time for some of them. If they finish third or onward from there, they still have plenty of time to get try to qualify for the Derby. But the 1-2 finish was Magnum Moon and Salamini. In terms of Magnum Moon, I was really, really impressed by him. I liked him coming in, but when a horse hasn't run in any significant, if you want to call it that, races, you can't be 100% sure, but I thought he did exactly what he needed to do in this race, and he ran a great trip. So it wasn't wire to wire, but he was forwardly placed right from the start. He did really well coming out. He got himself into a great position. He looked comfortable throughout. And when he needed to, approaching that final turn, he really turned it on. And he didn't blow away the field. That would be maybe a little bit of a stretch. But, he looked really solid down the stretch. Really good speed. And I thought, some people like to focus on the gallop out or after the race ends, how the horse looked. I thought he looked great. He's a really impressive looking horse, and I know that that can be really subjective. But just for me at least, I was just impressed watching him. So pretty much everything about him in this race I liked. In terms of moving forward, well, first of all, let's talk about that he earned those 50 points, and I've talked about this for the last couple of weeks when the 50-pointer started, that when you get those 50, you're basically in the Kentucky Derby if the trainer and owner team, if they want to pursue that. I discussed how last year 30 points is basically the cutoff. But so 50 will certainly get in. With that being said, he's probably going to run again, not just because to earn more points, but also because this would be a little bit of a layoff, especially for a horse that has now only run 3 times. I think they'd like to run him one more time Again, it's a little tricky because you want to have him, you don't want to rush him right after a big start, but at the same time, and the schedule kind of takes care of this because, there's specific races in each week, but you don't want to have him run right before the Derby because then he won't have enough time to recover after his last start. But I think there was a few I looked at. There's the Arkansas Derby, which is, I believe, 3 weeks, 3 Saturdays before the Derby. There's also the Bluegrass, which is right at the beginning of April. And there's the Wood Memorial, which is right in that same time period, either the first or second week in April. So though any of those 3 races are kind of a perfect point in terms of enough time to rest from the Rebel versus enough time to then recover before the Derby. I saw a report yesterday when I was reading it that he's likely, out of those 3, the most likely is the Arkansas Derby. So that would be cool. That usually gets a pretty decent field. So anyway, so Magnum Moon, thumbs up to him. Well done. I think I'm not sure he'll go to number 1 just yet in terms of people's, top 10 or whatever. But I think he's top 5 for sure. And I think for some people, he might be number 1. Again, there's not a ton to go off. But if you're someone who says, if you're someone that doesn't need a ton of evidence to go off of and say, well, I like that performance, so I'm going to trust him, then there's no reason not to have him right at the top of your leaderboard. And the other thing I would say is it's not like he totally came out of nowhere. He has a good pedigree, trained by Pletcher, and also, there was a decent amount of hype coming in even before the Rebel. So he's not totally coming out of nowhere. Second place, Salamini, again trained by Bob Baffert. And Salamini is a horse that has, for still being a 3-year-old, obviously, he's raced in a couple of really competitive races, and he hasn't won one of the bigger races, but he's finished second or third in all of them. So it is maybe just a tad concerning that he hasn't won one of those races yet. But if you look at those fields, he's raced against the likes of Bolt Doro, Good Magic, McKenzie. And again, he's performed extremely well in all of those races. The thing I like about Salamini, and he did it again at the Rebel, is I just think he's really tough. He'll always grind it out, and he'll always do his best. And if you look at the Rebel, he was in a tough spot at times, but he still managed to get second. And I'm not sure at this point he's one of the top, let's say, 3 or 4 favorites for the Derby in terms of the win. But he's definitely one of these horses that if you enjoy the exactas, trifectas, superfectas, best like that, I think he's a prime candidate to finish in one of those spots. And although he didn't win this race, he'll almost definitely have the points, even if he didn't run again, because again, this was not his first. He ran in the juvenile, and then there was 2 others that he did run in. So he'll be fine in terms of points, but he'll probably run again anyway, so that almost certainly won't be an issue. So he's definitely a horse I'm keeping a close eye on. And obviously there's the Bob Baffert factor. But putting all of that aside and just looking at both this race and his other races, I just love, his attitude and his desire to finish, have a good finish and finish in the top 2 or 3. And that's important, especially when you're dealing in the Derby, which is 20 horses. And if you've shown this ability to kind of persevere and finish strong, we see it all the time in the Derby where there's traffic, maybe slight collisions, you don't get a good post position, and you have to overcome a lot to win in a 20 horse field. And so Salamini I think is positioning himself well in terms of being one of those horses that can overcome adversity and still get a positive finish. Whether or not, again, he's going to be, let's say, after the draw, one of the 3 or 4 morning line favorites, I'm not sure at this point, but he will, he will be up there in terms of a horse that people like going to the Derby. I'm pretty sure of that. So again, but I do think that for now, this race, the main storyline is Magnum Moon and his really, really impressive race and his qualification in the Derby, what he's going to do next. And again, I'm only mentioning Magnum Moon and Salamina here. With that being said, go back and watch the race, see if there's any other horses that maybe catch your eye, look at the results. And, those 3rd or 4th place finishers did earn some points. And they still, as I've mentioned a few times, there's still plenty of opportunities for them to qualify for the Derby. The other race, which had Kentucky Derby implications this past weekend, was the Jeff Ruby Stakes. It didn't have quite, at least on paper, as well-known a field as the Rebel did. And then also the winner only received 20 points as opposed to 50. But it still, is in the landscape of 3-year-olds that can have an impact both in the Kentucky Derby and the Triple Crown. So Blended Citizen was the horse that wound up winning this race, and Blended Citizen is trained by Doug O'Neill. Doug O'Neill, it's important to point out, has had a decent amount of success in recent years in the Kentucky Derby, including just 2 years ago with Nyquist, who was a awesome horse that I really liked. So Blended Citizen, he earned these 20 points, and he had 2 points coming in because I think he had a 3rd place finish. So I'm not sure that those 22 points will be enough for him to get into the Derby, so he'll have to do some more work, more than likely. But it was a great win for him. He was a horse who didn't have a great record coming in here, but especially for the 2 and 3-year-olds, there's plenty of time for them to get better and improve. And if they show improvement, just because they have some poor performances on their resume doesn't mean that if they get into the Derby that they can't perform well if they've been on a hot streak. So I just wanted to point that out. Second was Pony Up, who's another horse trained by Todd Pletcher. So he's not going to earn too many points here with that, but could he build off that 2nd place performance and maybe do well in a race coming up? So that was the Jeff Ruby Stakes. Before I wrap this up, one important thing that I'd point out with with a race like the Jeff Ruby, and even with the bigger ones, with the 3rd and 4th place and on down from there, is just because maybe one of these horses might not get into the Derby doesn't mean that they're not going to have a big impact on the Triple Crown. In these videos, I'm focusing, I have a particular interest in the Kentucky Derby, so that's what's going to drive the most discussion. But let's be honest, when the Kentucky Derby's done, we're all going to focus on the Preakness and then ultimately on the Belmont. And every year we see horses that don't run in the Derby, but then come back and either they have a significant impact on the Preakness, whether or not they win or finish 2nd or 3rd in one of those races. Both the Preakness and the Belmont. And we saw it just last year, if you need evidence of it, where Cloud Computing was a 3-year-old, but he didn't run in the Derby, but then he came back 2 weeks later and won the Preakness. And that was the Preakness had a lot of hype last year, and Cloud Computing. So, one of these horses that we discuss here, maybe we're not going to spend that much time on them right now because they might not be in the Derby, but we shouldn't just forget about them, and we should look at their performances because they can have an impact on the Triple Crown. So I did want to point that out. So thanks for watching. It was a great weekend. Again, the Rebel Stakes, Magnum Moon, awesome performance. Salamini continues to perform well. Jeff Ruby the Jeff Ruby Stakes, Blended Citizen win with Pony Up finishing second. And this weekend, the Louisiana Derby, which is a huge race, and the winner actually gets 100 points, and the second place finisher gets 50. So we're really in the thick of things right now, and it's exciting for sure. And thing I've been really impressed with, just one last thing, is there's been some huge performances from these horses. You know, yeah, there's going to be some disappointments with horses that you thought were serious contenders, and maybe, you know, like I said, they finished like a disappointing third or fourth, or maybe even worse than that. But there's also been some horses that have either lived up to their reputation or have kind of built a strong case for why they should be a serious contender for the Derby, and that's exciting. So, thank you for watching this video. Pay attention to Louisiana Derby, and I'll talk to you soon.